I have a whole lot of questions. I'll tell you the background for the questions that I have is I think of all the times that I listened to your mom when I would sit on the front porch or when I was a little kid and I would just sit in a chair and listen to her tell the stories. And now I have like a gazillion questions that I wished I had asked when I was a little kid. So when I do the interviews, because I've done Mommy and I've done Janice, when I do the interviews, I think of the questions that I didn't ask your mom, and so I hope that I get. There's not a day when I think, oh, I wish I had asked another question. But to get started, can you please state your name and spell your name, and then provide your date of birth?
The name is William Lynn Gumby. William as William, Lynn as Lynn, and Gumby as Gumby.
Okay, and your date of birth, Bill?
The date of birth is 9/16/1931.
Okay. And I'm going to call you Bill, okay? Because that's what I grew up calling you. Is that all right?
Yes, that's fine. That's better than what some people called me.
Question for you. Where did the name Lynn come from? Your middle name?
Don't know, to tell you the truth.
Okay. Because when I look at the different names, like when I'm looking back through who's in the cemetery, or I'm reading old like members of your family, I see the same names rotated. You see Thomas, you see George, you see Harry, you see Lucinda, you see Harriet, and those names were rotated again and again throughout the family. But Lynn is the first time I've ever seen that in anything that I've looked at with your family. So I just wanted to ask that when you said it.
I was never told where it came from.
Okay. You were a twin of Harriet. How many twins did your mom have? Set of twins.
She had 2 sets of twins. We were the last set.
Okay. And the other set was Ethel and Ed?
Ethel, Louise, and Edgar Leroy.
Okay. All right. What do you remember what was your first memory of living on Mountain Street? What do you remember first?
Well, I guess at 3 or 4 years old, I remember that my older sister and her cousin, Elizabeth, they were in charge of walking me and my sister up and down the road. There are no sidewalks in that part of the town, because even to this day, I don't think there's any sidewalks in that part of the town. This is Mountain Street is off somewhat in distance from the rest of the small town of Mount Holly Springs, and so they would walk us carefully up and down the sidewalk looking for automobiles and things like that. And I remember going quite a distance up the road and then turning around and coming back down again.
And your oldest sister would have been Miss Mary?
No, that was Lucinda Jane.
Oh, Cindy was the oldest.
No. I when I said oldest, I may have mistaken. I meant an older sister. She was not the oldest one. It was an older sister that did the walking, but not the oldest one.
Okay, so it was Cindy, who was Tom's mother, Tom Gumby's mother. So it was Cindy. Yes. And Elizabeth. That was Elizabeth Foster.
Correct.
Okay, that's Larry Foster's mother. That's a good picture. Now, was the road paved or was it still gravel?
No, it was paved.
Okay.
I remember that Elizabeth got upset because I had these new shoes on, and to get their attention, I was kicking her leg with these new shoes, and she got upset about that.
When you say they were walking, was it you and Harriet they were walking, or?
Yes.
Okay. Were you and Harriet, how many years difference in your birth to the last birth that Grandma Gumby had?
I'm not quite. The one before us was Edna
Okay.
Carroll.
Okay, so it was Edna, and then you and Harriet.
Yes.
Okay, all right. How many families lived on Mountain Street and Cedar Street? African American families, or that you can remember back then?
Well, the Fosters and the Howards were close to us. And then when you went up Cedar Street, you had the Londons, and you had the Callaways further on Mountain Street. So what am I up to? About 5?
Yeah.
And I remember a group that was temporary there called the Fields, F-I-E-L-D, Fields family. They later moved into Carlisle.
Okay. Do you remember who lived across the street from the church?
That would be the London family, Mrs. Hetty London and her, I assume, husband. The London family.
Okay. And who was
L-O-N, I think that would be close to this. London family.
Yeah, there's a tombstone. It's a flat tombstone, but there's a tombstone in the cemetery that has her, Hattie. I know it's London. I think it might be Hattie. So she's buried in the Mount Tabor Cemetery.
Well, they lived directly across from the church.
Yeah, Hattie. Okay. Is it Hetty or Hattie? Was it H-E-T-T-I-E or H-A-T-T-I-E?
That's a good question. I'm going to think. I'd have to say it was Hattie London.
Okay.
That's as near as I can tell. That would mean a D instead of a T.
Okay. Thank you.
But I could be corrected on that one because I was quite small. Hattie seems to be what came across to me when I was told who they were.
Okay. The Howards, when you talk about the Howards, those were the people that lived in the house that I grew up in?
Yes.
Okay. And it was just the two of them?
Husband and wife. I'm trying to think her name might have been Fanny or something like that, or maybe that could have been a nickname.
Fanny Howard. Fanny Howard.
Well,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, the nearest I can come to it was Fanny or something like that, but I never saw it written out or something. I just heard her being referred to that.
Yeah.
So I'm really not sure how you spell the name, but I remember the name Fanny Howard and I think Joe Howard.
Yeah, that's who they were. And they're both buried in the Mount Tabor Cemetery too.
Well, you're telling me things I didn't know.
Well, you should see the cemetery. It's being cut on a regular basis, and it has a really nice fence around it. It's really the headstones have been cleaned and they've been reset. We have a little more work to do, but I think you would be very happy if you saw it. It looks really good.
Well, I think Harriet sent me some pictures. All I saw was, I think, the front of it. And so whether she has more of them or not, I don't know. But she sort of indicated that she might have more.
I'll see if I can send you some also, Bill, because it looks really, really nice. We're very proud of it, and we're going to start working on the church shortly. Um, when you were growing up, who were your friends? Were they just from Mountain Street, or were there friends in other parts of Mount Holly?
Well, as I, went to school, I developed friends, but the initial ones were in that area there. There was the Smith families, which consisted of two brothers, and there was the Motter family further down the road, but the road carried them out of the borough, and so they were in, I think, South Middleton borough, but their home wasn't very far from where your home is, and so Russell Motter and the Smiths, and there was I'm trying to remember. Oh, a Baker and a Baker family. These are the people that I remember because I used to play games like them. With make up football or basketball, stuff like that, baseball, and we eventually all played on the same team for the Mount Holly Bulldogs. These were teenage boys mostly. There wasn't too much professional or organized. I shouldn't say professional, but there wasn't too much organized activity for young girls. But there was something for boys in Little League, and eventually you advanced to a teenage type league. So the people that were my friends were people that I played sports with, and people that lived in the neighborhoods. The Smiths, the Motters, the Bakers, the Lingles. I was very close to Bobby Lingle. I think he ended up being a minister, but their family moved south to Virginia and purchased land down there. They were expert farmers, Sonny did, and all they wanted to do was farm. And so one of my closest friends was Bobby Lingle, who always wanted to be a minister. But I never really know what happened to him because their family moved when I got around 12, 14 years old. They moved south to Virginia, and that's the last I never saw them again, even though my mother and Harriet had told me that they occasionally came back to look at their old homesteads. But I had left Mount Holly and gone to school at Penn State and never really came back and resettled in Mount Holly Springs.
How did they spell their last name?
Lingle?
Yeah. Lengle? Is that?
That sounds close to it, Ellie.
Okay.
Lingo.
Okay. And where did they live?
They lived on a farm directly opposite you where that road that went down to. Do you know where your house is?
Yeah.
There's a road that leads from the main highway down to the farm.
Was that the old Furman farm?
No, there was a farm further out Mountain Street in South Towson, but this farm is what I'm talking about was not parallel but perpendicular to yours. So this road ran at right angles from Mountain Street down over the hill and to the valley where there was, where the railroad was at all?
Yeah.
Well, that's where their farm was, on the other side of the railroad.
Okay. All right. I think I know where that is. I don't think it's farmed anymore down there.
Yeah, but it's probably still active from the standpoint of the farmhouse and the barns and something like that. Maybe still there.
Yeah. That's interesting. Where did you attend public school?
I went to the first 9 grades at Mount Holly Springs, and then for the 10th grade, we transferred to Carlisle High School.
Okay.
But Mount Holly Elementary School went from the first grade to 9th grade. When you completed 9th grade, you transferred to Carlisle High School. There was no kindergarten at that time, so that you started school usually at 5 to 6 years old, and continued to the ninth grade, which we graduated with a little ceremony, and then went Carlisle to finish up to the 12th grade.
Do you remember, it is the grade school, the elementary school, it was the old, what's the firehouse now? It's the red building?
Yes.
Okay, on Chestnut Street.
I've been inside it since it transferred to, a firehouse, because we had several lunches or dinners there, as a result of funerals that took place, and we had the meeting there for food and things like that. So I understand how it has been recreated, so to speak. But
Wow.
that was the original Mount Holly Elementary School.
What year did you graduate from high school, 12th grade?
1950.
Okay. And you started at Dickinson right after that, the following year?
Yes. I graduated from Dickinson in 1954.
Okay. When you were in grade school, in public school in Holly, do you remember any of your teachers?
Yes. Mrs. Trine taught, Mrs. No, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Hartzell taught history. Miss Hines was my first grade teacher, because I remember getting a spanking from her because I sat there stupidly and went to the bathroom in the room instead of raising my hands and asking to go, and ended up getting spanked because I did that.
She spanked you?
As you can understand, I wasn't very well trained about that sort of thing, and so I didn't know what to do. So I just went to the bathroom and set it in my chair, and ended up getting spanked.
Oh my! What grade was that?
First grade.
Oh my gosh!
So I started out pretty good, didn't I?
But you went very far. So.
Mrs. Hines was the teacher, and I remember, but. I wasn't the only one who got spanked. If anybody got out of line with her, then they got it, so they did.
She spanked you? Wow. Did you have Miss Nikki?
Yeah, second grade teacher.
Yeah, I had her too.
And I'm trying to think of the sixth grade teacher. I remember that she married a highway patrolman, and we were all very upset. She lived with a man named Dr. Snyder, who had the little drugstore there on Main Street, and I don't know what the relationship between him and her was, whether she was actually a daughter of his or what, but I'm trying to think of her name. Anyway, Miss Hartzell was the English teacher for 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, and Pop Messenger, he was the principal.
Oh, okay.
Messenger, I think, is Messinger or something close to that. Messenger.
Okay. He was the principal.
Yes. The one I'm having difficulty remember is the sixth grade teacher. The fourth grade teacher was Miss Hartzell, but I can't remember Strom, something close to that. Does that name ever show up? Miss Strom, SCROME or something like that?
No.
Miss Strom?
No,
I don't. Her name changed because she married a state trooper, and that upset all the students about her, because they were half crazy about her herself. We were only, 12 or 14 years old or something like that.
Yeah. I when I was in sixth grade, I think I had Mrs. Walker. So I don't know. It's just interesting comparing, because Mrs. Hartzell was the principal by the time I got to school.
Oh, well, what's the name? Messenger had barely retired, so he did something like that.
Yeah. When you were going to grade school, what did you think you would grow up to be?
I told Messenger in ninth grade that I wanted to be a scientist. And
really?
I told him, we got into a discussion. He told me, he said that I wasn't pretty out enough that I should have been, they run those stupid IQ tests, for everybody, and so the IQ indicated that I should be at the head of the class. When I wasn't the head was a young lady named Elizabeth Swaim, who was the daughter of a minister, Dr. Swaim, Swaim. She was the darling of the class, but Messenger was telling me that I should be there because I wasn't putting out enough, or something like that. Anyway, he said, "What do you plan to do?" He said, "Those people, graduate, they get a job." I said, "I want to be a scientist, But I really didn't know what that meant at that time, but I had seen it in some of the literature that I was reading, and so I thought that'd be a good idea.
And so that's interesting because the person that you mentioned was a you said she was the head of the class, Swain. I think she was a poet, and her house is still around. So.
Elizabeth Swain was very talented. The reason why, you might wonder how I got into that situation, Messenger was supposed to be in charge of the guidance for the school as well as being the head principal. He was supposed to guide people into various, future programs, you see. And so that's how it came up with it. He asked me what I wanted to do, and I told him. But he was supposed to be the guidance counselor, and so that he thought that what you did was go out and got a job afterwards. You finish school, you go out and get a job. He didn't. He thought I was, that type of material or not. He's the one that said that I should be the head of the class. I didn't say that. He said it.
How in school? How integrated was it? When you were going to school, were you the only African American?
Which school? Elementary school, high school, or college?
Elementary school.
Well, there was one or two. There was a group called the Hemphills, which lived in Upper Holly Springs, rather than Lower, but they had a fairly large family, and my brother Junior got in trouble because Messenger was trying to discipline one of these Hemphill boys, and Junior got into the mix too, and so we had a little problem with that in the family because Messenger got all excited because I think Junior might have gave him a little shove to push him away from the Hemphill boy, and they had to go, settle this thing out somehow, some way. But I was much younger, of course, than Junior. I would have been 10 years under him as far as age concerns. Junior is ahead of Ethel and Edgar. So he was 3 groups removed from me. So age-wise, I don't think I was in school at the time this happened because Junior was about 6 grades ahead of me or something like that. So if I was in the 3rd grade, he was in the 9th grade or something like that.
Junior was Rosalind's father?
What's that?
Junior was Rosalind's father?
Yeah, he had 4 of them.
Okay. All right.
Rosalind, our brother Bertie, and Brenda. 4 children, 3 girls and 1 boy.
Tell me about Mount Tabor, the church, when you were growing up. What ministers do you remember from Mount Tabor?
I'm trying to think of there was a female minister who I think was the last one.
Mrs. Parr.
Parr, yes, from Chambersburg. And I'm trying to think of I might have been. I'm having difficulty remembering the male minister, partly because of the problem that I was young whenever he was in charge, and by the time I went to high school and then on to college, I got separated from the activities there. So I did, and so I do remember Minister Parr, because she let me take over some of the sermons. I was in first years in Dickinson at that time, and still going to church in Mount Holly because I always lived at home. I never lived on campus and all that. I couldn't afford to. I could barely make it through, or the money you had to pay for classes, and get a little bite to eat or something like that, So I did take over some of the classes that Mrs. Parr was organizing, and maybe she was just trying to get me some experience or something like that along that line. But I couldn't very well turn her down, because after all, I was in school and in college and was learning something, about how to present an argument or a program of some type, and so there wasn't no way that I could back out of this thing, and so I did it.
Okay, and remember we talked about the Londons. You had said that the Londons, when we were talking about Hattie London, was he ever a minister at the church?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think they were involved at the church. By the time I came along, the concentration of African Americans had dwindled tremendously. You see, I'm naming you basically the families that were left: the Callaways, the Howards, and then they passed, of course, and the Elizabeth and her family. There's some people who you might call being mixed, and so I don't know what kind you'd put it in. There was a Scott family where the husband was African American and the wife was white. Bess Scott was Caucasian, and her husband Charlie was African American. So they had a mixture of children, and some looked very fair, and some you could obviously see that they were dipped in some way. But
where did they live?
They lived up in the mountains. When you continue Cedar Street, it goes way up into the mountains there, and then it makes a split, and one portion of it goes to the right, and the other portion goes to the left. It goes down along Cumberland Mountain. So not only were the Sweeties there, I'm trying to think of some, the Scotts were there, but some Sweeties came into the picture, and Mr. Mills, who used to have delicious strawberries because he used to complain of people raiding his strawberry patches and stealing them before he could pick them and get them out to, to sell, Mr. Mills, and then the Scotts, and the Bellows. The Bellows, they were famous because Skinny Bellows was the butcher, and so every fall we had this big butchering ceremonies where he would come down, and I had the job. I was a 6 to 8 year old. My job was to keep the fires burning under the kettles, so they had hot water and all. You see, but these are people. Where they lived along that mountain trail that I'm trying to describe to you, and it's a split off of Cedar Street. When you finally go up there and hit the mountains, there were people living up there, and if you went to the left or to the right, you ran into families. One of these was the Scott family, which was a mixture.
Yeah. Yeah, and that trail is interesting because it could be a potential hiking trail now.
I'm sure it's still believable that you could go up and down there, so you could,
the one that goes off to the left goes over to Boiling Springs, and then over there is the that trail that everybody I forget what it's called, but there's a trail that everybody uses. Um, when you went to do you remember the Nichols? Do you remember Reverend Nichols?
Yes, yes, because he had a son named Arthur, and Arthur was involved in our, activities, of the young people, like playing sports and things like that. So, yes, now was Mrs. Nichols, was that due to her husband? Was her husband's name Nichols? I was never really sure about that, but I assumed that she was married to him, but. I know, yes, his name, he must have been the Reverend Nichols. What else could he have been?
Right. And Art's name, do you remember what his name was?
Arthur?
Yeah.
That was the son, Arthur.
Okay. Yeah.
A-R-T-H-U-R.
You don't think he had a different name, maybe like Davis?
Arthur. As a last name?
Yeah.
I can't verify that, because all I ever referred to was Arthur Nichols. Arthur was an excellent museum, and I don't museum, and I don't know what happened to him. I know that he grew up and became quite talented and plays with some of these jazz orchestra combos, that were being built and spread around the countryside, But I asked one of my other friends, Russell Bonner, when I was down there about 15 years ago, I said, whatever happened to Arthur Nichols? And he didn't know either. But I know that they moved to Harrisburg after he lost the position, and was replaced by Pastor Parr. Why, I think they moved to Harrisburg, and from there on. But what I do remember about Arthur is his being extremely talented in music. So he did, because he played in the. Believe it or not, that at Mount Holly Springs elementary school, we had an orchestra. So then, and a woman named Catherine King had built this thing together when she became there as a music teacher, and she developed an orchestra, and they used to put on concerts and things like that. And Arthur played the bass fiddle on the thing. I played the drums until they kicked me off the team. Anyway, I'm telling you. Why am I telling you this? Because that little school of nine grades was quite progressive for his age and all. If you put it in its proper perspective, I'm telling you, they had an orchestra, and that orchestra even existed after I was gone and moved on to Carlisle, because it had my brother Edgar had played in it, and then they had a band. They had a town band, the Mount Holly Band, which used to play at various ceremonies, like Memorial Day or July 4th or something. And they used to move, and they were so good that they would go to other towns and cities and play. Because I remember Bird Ditzel telling my mother then about something, that they went to a certain town, and because my brother Edgar was playing the drums, they were going to deny them from playing, and so the whole band left. So it did, and so we ran into a little segregation and all, and discrimination, but nowhere as near as severe. Black and white kids played together and all there in Mount Holly, maybe because it was a small town. If it was a larger town like Harrisburg or something like that, this division would start to set in. But I have to really admit that the sharp division between black and white didn't really present itself. Yes, they had different religious surges and all, but as far as activities, do you know that white people would come over there to our church, and that we ever told that, once or twice a year, and we'd have huge crowds of people, lined all up on the street, these people came over there, and we were supposed to go over and invited to go over to their churches, but rarely did we go over there, but they did come over there to our church,
Yeah,
And,
I've heard stories about, and I've had people tell me that they would go to the church, and during when they were young, that they would attend the church, and that it was always welcomed. They were always welcomed.
I didn't want to interrupt interrupt you, but one of the selling points, of course, was the gospel music that they liked to hear.
Yeah, that's true. Do you remember which house the Nichols lived in?
Parsonage. They lived in the parsonage, which has been turned down.
So they lived down the street by Catherine Calloway's house.
Yeah, you know where the parsonage was? It's a vacant lot right now.
Yeah.
And but it's to the left of where Catherine Calloway lived. Yes, that was the church parsonage, A.M.E. Zion parsonage, so it was. And that's where Arthur and his brother lived as the minister.
Okay. And do you remember how old Arthur was? You said he was like very talented, but was he younger than you or older than you?
No, he was younger than me, that much. But how much younger than me, I'm not sure. But he was definitely maybe 2 to 3 years younger than me.
Okay. Do you remember a Mrs. King as a teacher?
Yes, Catherine King was the music teacher.
Okay.
She kicked me off the drum corps because I missed too many concerts. She said, "See, what in the wintertime we had difficulty getting to programs and things like that, And my mother was very strict with us, If she said that we weren't going, no matter what the situation was, that you weren't going. So I had to cancel out of several concerts and all, and so it got annoying. So she just said, well, I didn't have to show up anymore.
Okay.
But I had taken over because my brother, Edgar, who was much better at the playing music of all types, Edgar, he was end up directing the choir at Shady University. When he was down there, he was deep into music, so he was much deeper than I am. So I've learned to appreciate it, especially jazz, because I've collected a lot of all these great performers. So I have. But my brother Ed, he really ate this stuff up. He thrived on music, so he did. Not. He was at the end where you produce the music. Not being. I was at the end where the best I could do was listen to it, enjoy it. But Ed, help create the music, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's interesting. Getting back to Mount Tabor, did you ever go to the second floor?
Yes, only briefly a couple of times. I think that somebody a while lived up there or something like that. So there had rented an apartment up there. I only went up there briefly because, as I remember, so I did. But I could see that there was a livable space up there. Yes.
Did you ever hear any stories about what the second floor was used for?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't know what it was used for, to tell you the truth. But I knew that it existed. I thought that it was an apartment or something where somebody lived there, but I could never verify that, and I never tried to tell you the truth. I was just somewhat astonished by the fact that it existed the way it did.
Was it one long room, or was it divided up?
I couldn't see more than one room as it existed. So
right.
I couldn't see more than one room.
Who taught in Sunday school when you were going to Mount Tabor?
My older sister, Ethel.
Okay. She was mine, too. I think she taught everybody Sunday school.
And she forced me to take part in it, and so I did it with that, too, mainly because I knew that if I didn't do that, she would continue to bug me about it, so I did it.
Do you remember what was the church ever painted? Do you remember anything as far as what the church looked like in past years?
I remember that they were having a problem if you faced the church and then looked to the right and to the left. The right side of it suffered some sort of damage, and I remember at one time it was rebuilt completely. remember what you're doing. You're standing at the road facing the church, and if you look to your right hand, that whole right side was rebuilt. I remember it because I remember seeing it being open when I went up there, and that they were working on it. Now, this may have been a necessity where it suffered some damage, doing a storm or something like that. But I do remember it being rebuilt, and I remember that the interior was painted at one time. I don't know whether the outside of it was or not, but I remember that some of the interior was painted at one time. But I do remember this open space on the right-hand side where they were really repairing the wall along there.
That's interesting. Do you remember who did the work on it?
Yeah, my father was one who seemed to be knee deep in the thing. So he was. In fact, he was the one that you might say was in charge. So it was, But other people were helping him. So there were. I'm trying to think of people that may also have been involved with that. I know that my father was doing the lead on it because I saw that. But he had other people helping. So it is. And maybe my older brothers might have been involved, like John Jr. or something like that. But a decision must have been made that something had to be done. And so the only thing I could think of is that it might have been damaged by a storm or something like that, that came to.
What other stories do you remember about the church?
Well, there was Sister Parr. Before that, there's Nichols. I do remember these situations where people from over the Lutheran Church came over and shared services with us. This didn't happen, every day. It might be once or twice a year, some specialized occasion. There were funerals that took place there when I was very small, and I, wondered about the whole thing, because I really didn't know what was happening because I was 6 or 7 years old, something like that. Name some of the funerals that happened there. Well, I had a brother that died. He was an athlete, and he had gotten a scholarship to Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And he was working during the summer on the garbage trucks, picking up garbage and taking it to the station for disposal. And he caught pneumonia. Now, he didn't live at home. He lived with a relative of ours who, my father's brother and his wife lived in Carlisle, and so I think his name was George Raymond or something like that.
George, it was George. He's buried next to your mom and dad.
He was a brilliant athlete, and he passed away, and so I remember that was one of the first ceremonies that I observed. So but I knew who he was. But he was, I'm trying to remember where he fit in. There's Mary Evelyn, and there's Raymond, there's John, and there's Junior. So he must have been in between John and Junior, maybe, something like that, But it was a tragic thing because he had won the scholarship, and he had an athletic scholarship, because he was a great high jumper and trackman at Carlisle High School, and so he ended up getting a scholarship, but he was never able to take advantage of it because he caught pneumonia during the summer, and at that age, ammonia was not as treatable as it is now. And you still have people die from pneumonia, but not as many as used to be. Remember the big tragedy of 1918 where 180,000 people died or something like that in the United States due to pneumonia. Anyway, I remember George because I was a kid and he came out. He used to stay with my Aunt Emma and her husband in Carlisle because you imagine 11 kids came to that house there that you saw at
the Red House. The Red House. I call it the Red House.
And you wonder how it is long. So he did anyway. He would come out on weekends, and we would play, hopscotch, and so we had this rope, and we were holding it up. Now, remember, we're only about 5 or 6 years old. We had this rope, and so we're holding it up, and George Raymond came up there and just jumped right over the top of it. So he did. And we tried to hold it as high as we could. Each time we held it, he would jump over the top of the thing. And so what he was a high jumper. So he was.
Oh wow, that's interesting.
You know anything about sports? You can picture what this was. Here's these kids, that only about 4 or 5, would play. We'd been playing hopscotch, and now George came along. He said, "Hold that rope up there," So we held it up, and he just went right over the top of it.
Oh wow! He's buried next to your mom and dad in Mount Tabor.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Who else do you remember having funeral services in the church?
I'm sure that there were other cases, of not even part of our family, but other families where this took place, but I was still young, so I was, my problem in trying to remember is the age group that I was in. Remember my brother, George Raymond, because he was family, so I was, I took part in that, but even there, I didn't really know what was going on. I just knew there was a bunch of people there, and why they were behaving the way they were and all, that was beyond me. I was a kid.
Do you remember anything about the Johnson Cemetery?
Johnson.
That would be behind the Blue House.
I know that there's a cemetery back of the foster homes. Where some of their members were buried up there, and you could even see the tombs. I would go, on a hiking, and run into these tombstones. I know that some of the family members of their family were buried up there. Exactly who those people are, though, I know Bob's sister may have been buried up there. I'm trying to remember her name. There was Mom, Daisy, and what was the third one? You tell I'm getting old. I can remember. They were
Miss Veeney. Miss Veeney.
Lavinia. Okay, that's it. Okay. Lavinia might be buried up there because I don't know where else she could have been buried if she wasn't buried there. The only other option was to go in Carlisle and be buried in the Carlisle Cemetery because there were very few African Americans in the so-called white cemetery until more recent days, when people are buried up there because there's just no more room at the colored cemetery. But for a long period of time, there were very few African Americans buried in the main large cemetery over there as you go up the hill and leave the town.
The Mount Hollis.
Ed Lavinia might be buried up there at that little cemetery that you referred to, because I'm sure that people before her were buried. There could be quite a few people there,
She's buried in Mount Tabor. Miss Veeney's buried
Pardon?
in Mount Tabor.
Is there a name for it?
No, Miss Veeney's buried in, Lavinia is buried in Mount Tabor. There's a
Oh, okay.
there's a marker for her. But I just wondered if you remembered. Do you remember Aunt Betty?
Yeah, yeah. I remember a lady named Aunt Betty. Yeah.
But I think she died around 52, and you may not have remembered that.
Well, at 52, where was I? I was
You were at Dickinson, so you were still here.
Dickinson. I was still there. Betty. Where would Betty be?
Betty Johnson.
You've got me on that one.
Yeah, she's buried there. She's buried back in that cemetery. But I just wondered if you remembered anybody else. Do you remember how many headstones were in that cemetery?
Which one? You mean the one that you were referring to, the isolated?
Yeah, the one behind Foster House.
Oh, no, I don't know, because I'll tell you why I don't know. I never bothered trying to count them. There could be only 3 or 4 for all I know. I just saw some of them were more pronounced, and they stuck up until I could see what it was. But I didn't really spend that much time there to try to find out just actually how many there were. I never bothered counting them.
Okay. A question, a fast forward question for you. Your dad, I called him Grandpa Gumby, was Grand Marshal of one of the parades in Holly one year. Do you remember what year that was?
No, because I wasn't. You're telling me something that I didn't know. I wasn't aware of.
Okay. Harriet talks about that. So I just wondered, because I just wondered if you remembered what year. I'll have to ask her. Let's see. What else do I have? And do you remember how many funerals you attended? And don't want to be morbid, but how many funerals you attended out of Mount Tabor? Other than George's?
I would guess at about 3 or 4.
Okay.
No more than that, sort of.
Okay.
Because I remember Miss Hetty saw it too, and who else?
You remember Miss Hetty's funeral being out of that church?
Yeah, I think I remember that one. Yeah.
Okay. What? Let me see. What else? What was it like growing up as a twin on Mountain Street?
Well, me being a female rather than a male didn't get involved in my activities so much, because girls were separated at that time, and separated from the standpoint that they didn't take place in activities, like the sports and all, their education in that area came at a later time in life, so they had their separate activities more or less to do, play with doll babies or something like that, and what girls did or something like that. But the integration, from my way of looking at it, didn't take place until later on in life, if you know what I mean by that. That
Okay.
boys and girls now, that they play together much more frequently than they did at the time I was growing up. And they hated the expression, "Oh, you're a girl, so Lady, that you shouldn't be doing this," or something like that. Well, that doesn't work anymore. So
Yeah, that's so sad. when let's talk about your time at Dickinson College. Um, t- I know you and I talked about this, but this is a different interview, so you might have to say things that you've already talked to me about before. But talk to me about Dickinson College and how you got to go to Dickinson College, or the first time. Did you think did you want to go to Dickinson? You said you had wanted to be a scientist, but had you really formulated going to Dickinson College?
No, no, it was more or less pumped into my mind. A young lady named Miss Emmeline Trine. And who was she? Well, I had Emmeline Trine in 10th grade at Carlisle High School. And she was the English teacher for 10th grade. And I had one other particular advantage, that I had rode with her from Mount Holly into Carlisle on several occasions, And at her idea or her suggestion, I would walk from our home over to the Holly Square and pick up her. She would drive by in her Buick and pick me up because she motored on into Carlisle. This went on for quite a few years, and she, having had me in 10th grade, knew what some of the capabilities that I had was, because my strong point was really in mathematics, and science. I did very well at them, but I did or just above average, just put it that way, in the rest of my subjects. But I really shined in mathematics and science. And how did Emmeline Trine know that? Because she knew the other teachers that I was involved with at the Carlisle High School. And so, being somewhat in a quandary, I had no idea how I was going to get to college, to tell you the truth. And so she said, well, why not Dickinson? She said, I have some friends that I associate with over there, some of the professors and all, and they're always telling me that if we have an African-American student, which we think is qualified, to send them over there, and they try to persuade management or the administration to provide some sort of financial support. And so they said, what's required is you're taking an exam. And I took this IQ test where you play with blocks and things like that. And the answer came back that he is acceptable. What the woman said was he's a genius category. And so they offered me a part-time scholarship, but I'm telling you that where the driving force came from, because I really didn't know what I was going to do. I guess I would normally end up getting a job working in a shoe factory or someplace like that, or during my stay at Dickinson during the summertime. I worked on the roads, helping to build roads like the superhighways and all, but the emphasis came from outside because I really didn't see my way through to go on to college, to be honest with you. I just wanted you to realize that I didn't know anything about these scholarships, that might be available at various schools, like Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Penn State and Ohio State. They have them all over the place now, right? That you could apply for those things. Well, I wasn't familiar with that sort of technique. You talked about 1960, so yeah.
Did the scholarship have a name?
I wasn't aware of it because it wasn't a full scholarship anyway. It was a part-time. They paid 50% and I paid 50%.
Okay.
So if it had a name, I wasn't aware of what it was.
Okay.
I was just that I would only have to come up with half of the tuition.
So you worked during the summer to get that tuition?
Yes, I did. All 4 years, I built roads on the highways in Pennsylvania. there
Okay.
were some interesting stories there. Like one night, the same a rainstorm or something came up, and the guys all took it. They jumped into trucks and took off, and left me. I was what you call the flag man. My job was to document all the oil, that they put down on the road before they put down on the macadam and all, so that we keep a track of it. And what happens is the excess oil they would take and put on their own private driveways or something like that. But this particular night, the storm came up while we were still in progress, and they all took off and left me stranded. So I had to go to some neighbor's place in a completely unfamiliar area, knock on the door, and ask to use their phone because I was stranded. And so I could call home to Dad to come and pick me up, And
Oh.
so everybody laughed about that the next day, but it wasn't funny to me, so it wasn't.
Mhm.
I was out there stranded in the middle of nowhere. So
How much was the tuition for Dickinson?
I was roughly around 1,600 a year, something like that.
Okay, and you paid 50%, and the scholarship covered the other 50.
That's it.
Okay, and did you have to buy your books?
Yes, there was some additional expenses. Yeah, everything you had to purchase in the bookstore, had to be cash or something like that, or credit card or whatever you see. And so I managed that, but I figured that Miss Chide had done enough, and had gone out of her way, and so I hesitated to ask her for any guidance, because she had always said she would have probably come up with it, because she wanted to see this thing through. She was going to call these people's bluff at Dickinson, who she thought were a bunch of pompous type people anyhow, and so she said, they're going to keep shooting off their mouth, so I'm going to give them something to shoot about, and that's what she did.
She sounded like a pretty nice person.
Very smart, very talented. I loved her in English class, because she would read all these famous articles of people back in the 18th century, but she did it in their style, like it was old English. She mimicked the sound and the voice and everything. And it was fascinating to watch her to go through those things, like Romeo, Juliet, or something like that. She played the part of one or the other, and she was really is really what she was.
Wow.
And she was too good for Carlisle High School, I can tell you that right now. She was way, way out of her jurisdiction. And she had finally ended up at Shippensburg. But while she was at Carlisle, I kept saying to myself, what in the world is this woman doing here? She seemed to be out of place at Carlisle High School.
So she took. So you were able to write in every day to attend your classes at Dickinson with her. She would go to the.
4 years did that. So it did. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
I'm
going to have to switch to another remote because this thing sounds like it's getting ready to run out. Hold on.
Okay.
Hello.
Okay.
4 years I did that. So I did back and forth, and really never missed a day or something like that. She didn't have to come for me. I would be there in the corner when she got into her car and pulled her, and off we'd go. And then to get back home, of course, I would hitchhike, with the thumb, and various people, because they knew that I was a Gumby, because they were coming to Mount Holly Springs. And so everybody in Mount Holly Springs is a small enough. I had played sports, coming up as a teenager on the old Holly Bulldogs, so everybody knew who I was, and so that I was one of Harry's boys, in fact, the last one. But anyway, I get back home. Sometimes it would be 9 o'clock at night because I had been out for basketball or something like that, and get back home again.
Wow.
But 4 years that woman did that, ferried me back and forth to Dickinson, and so what I didn't know is what happened to her afterwards, But at Dickinson,
I was a definite minority there. There couldn't have been more than a handful of African Americans. They had some Asians, they had some Latinos. It's strongly Jewish. Dickinson is known for the precursor for medical school. And so you go there if you're going to be a doctor, because you have to put 4 years in before you go to medical school. So there was a lot of Jewish students there, both men and women, and I was adopted by the Jewish family. One of the reasons why is my Aunt Elsie was the cook at the Jewish family, and those guys would run back and tell Aunt Elsie, they said, that Bill is something else, and Elsie, because she was there. I mean, she did that for about 50 years, something like that.
Well, what was the name of the family? What was the name of the family?
The fraternity?
No, the name of the family. You said there was a Jewish family that Aunt Elsie cooked for?
No, it was a sorority. I'm sorry, I didn't mean misleading. It was a Jewish fraternity is what she cooked for.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. What were some of the do you remember any difficulties that you had at Dickinson that really stick out in your mind?
Not difficulties, not really. I'm trying to think of what would difficulties. Were
you nervous or scared when you went in? Were the people nice? Were the other students nice? Or, what was college life for you going to Dickinson College and living off campus? You weren't living on campus, so it was a little bit different.
Well, what helped is they have the fraternity system, yes, and they have their individual houses, but then the group called the Independents, who are not part of any fraternity, so you see, and so they had a section set aside where the Independents could meet, in one of the large halls that they have there, you see, and so I essentially joined the independent group, so I did, just to have somebody to associate with. And I would also go over there to the Jewish fraternity when they invited me. And so if I tried to, beg off and something like that, they accused me of being prejudiced. The Jew boys, you said, Bill, you're prejudiced, that, you see, because I wouldn't come over there and have dinner with them or something like that, It wasn't that I was shitting them or something like that, I just didn't feel all that comfortable there, so I didn't, but I didn't want them to know that. So then they started saying that I was prejudiced, that I hated Jews or something like that. I said, you're ridiculous. That's a ridiculous statement, So this sort of batter would go back and forth between us, and you just learned how to play it. So this is what it boils down to, you see. But to be somebody discriminated outright again, I have to admit that I was not so, the professors, everybody treated me like I was just another student, you see. But I'm telling you that the school itself is fraternity and sorority oriented. That's where the major action takes place. You understand what I'm saying between the students?
Yes.
So what's left is the independent group, which I was a part of. Now, it's not a small group. It's quite large, the independent group, but they're different in their actions and in their attitude than the sorority people have this advantage. They have all these old tests and things like from 10 years back that the professors have been given in their classes, and they change very little. And so the sororities and fraternities, their students or their occupants they do very well in the classes and all, because they have all this back support, so they do, which the independents have not bothered to accumulate. So as far as science was going, I really didn't need them, so, but somebody who is not as adaptable, doesn't have a very high IQ, could easily go through Dickinson or any other college, Penn State or Ohio State or Harvard. They're all set up a certain way. I'm trying to show you why it's an advantage to belong to a sorority or to a fraternity. because they stick together, and if they get a hold of a test or something like that, then everybody in the group benefits from it. You following me?
Yeah, I do.
Well,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
that was outside of my jurisdiction, other than the fact that I had this special relationship with the Jews because my aunt Elsie worked there, and they marveled. I was doing very well in the classes, especially the science classes, and they would say, well, "Come back and tell her, Elsie, that guy, he's killing them over there." So that sort of thing. Anyway, me and a girl named Jackie Smith were vying for top billing as far as the science classes were concerned, you see. And Jackie did the normal thing when she graduated. She got married to somebody else that she had been dating while she was in Dickinson. This guy she married didn't even go to Dickinson. He went to another college, you see. And so if you want to know what happened to Jackie Smith, why she ended up with the job that she wanted to be, the housewife of somebody who's going to be financially able to for her to live in the style which she was accustomed to. But as far as discrimination, it was pretty hard to detect that, no matter where I turned to Dickinson. So I did.
That's good to hear. I mean, that's good to hear.
Remember, these are not, these are mature people that you're dealing with, They're 19, 20, 21, 22 years old. They're not kids anymore. So, yeah.
When you used to ride with Mrs. Trine into Carlisle, was there anybody else that used to ride along, or were you the only one?
Nope, just us.
Okay.
Her and me. I'm trying to think of why she did this or something like that. I think she felt that I needed a little push here or there, something like that, that I wasn't responding the way that I should respond, or the way she wanted me to respond. And so what I needed was a little push in them. Now, African Americans may have already been in her background and in that Trine family, because there's a gentleman called Maynard, and I always referred to him as Maynard Trine, but they said his name was Maynard Moyle. And so he was the product of one of the Trines and somebody else who probably was African American or something like that. Anyway, why am I saying this? I'm searching for the type of individual that Evelyn Trine was. That's all. And that if she saw somebody showed potential for something like that, well, and they weren't doing it, then she lit into it. So she didn't. And so the reason why this happened is because she had me as a student in 10th grade. In 10th grade, I don't know whether you remember all of that, but you have to do things like write simple short essays or something.
Yes.
One day you'll have a contest where everybody's supposed to be a salesman or something like that, and they're trying to sell a product and convince the rest of the class. Well, we went through all that, so we did, and so she decided that this particular person needed more special attention, if you want to put it that way, and it turned out to be me.
Did Maynard live at her house? Live at the Trine house on the square?
He lived there. He took care of the things, so he did. He was the Mr. Everything, the custodian. If the gas burner needed repaired, he did that. He lived there, and I referred to him as Mr. Maynard Trine. Now, somebody else might have referred to him as something else, but that's the way I referred to him. Why? Because that's the way I was told to refer to him by.
Who told you that?
Evelyn Trine herself.
Okay. Were her parents alive did you know her parents?
No. I never met them. No.
Okay.
The thing that I most regret is the fact that I left Dickinson, and I did. It was as much my fault, I guess, as hers. I did not keep in contact with her, and I only found out recently what really happened to her. I knew that she had left Dickinson to go to be a professor at Shippensburg, because that was the type of atmosphere where she really should be in the first place. She was much too talented, and her talent was being lost or buried at Carlisle High School. So it was.
And just to finish out your education, you went. What did you do after you graduated from Dickinson?
Well, my professor suggested that I send a letter to Penn State for a graduate teaching assistantship, and so I sent this letter, and came back a reply of being accepted, And so I went up to Penn State on a graduate teaching scholarship, and was hopefully going to come out of there with a PhD, but I didn't quite meet the PhD standards. And so I had acquired a master's while I was there, and I got this offer to go into NZ. I figured I'd spent enough time foolishly trying to get a doctor's degree, and I needed to go out and try to make some money somewhere. And so I left Penn State with the master's and was hired by Bausch and Lomb, who was basically a glass-oriented company, and they wanted somebody with knowledge of the new plastics that were being discovered. And so I went up there in 1960, and the modern contact lens was born there while I was there helping to develop it. And so that's the one claim I might have to fame, is that I partly responsible for the development of the contact lens as it's now known, the one that holds up water and all. And just about everybody is trying to mimic it, but it was developed at Bausch and Lomb in 1968 by me and another group of talented chemists and physicists. But your
master's degree was in what?
Organic chemistry.
Organic. I knew that, but I needed you to tell the recording.
It was in organic chemistry, and there's a couple of papers out that support it.
That's very good. Getting back, I want to switch back because I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Elias Parker. What do you remember about Elias Parker and his wife? Just listening to stories from your mom, or tell me what you remember about them.
Hold on 1 minute. The information that I have, I gleaned from my mother, but I gotta warn you that it's somewhat limited.
Okay.
I was told that Elias Parker had been in the Civil War, and as a result of his actions in the Civil War, he was awarded a couple of acres of land, and I don't know whether some money was involved or not, but this was maybe standard practice for all soldiers maybe who were coming out of the war. Remember, some of the presidential candidates have argued that we were supposed to get 40 acres of land and a mule or something like that.
Yeah, I remember.
That's standard, more of a joke. Anyway, he did get some land, and he built this log cabin. Now, how or where my mother came into the picture is confusing, because I was told that she was a part Indian young lady from a tribe called the Blackfoot tribe in South Dakota, out in the Midwest, and that she had been brought in to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, to what was known as the Indian School, where they were trying to convert Indian children into being productive U.S. citizen, and that she told me she spent to the 8th grade learning how to do cooking and sewing. She was an excellent cook, and she was an excellent sewer. She made decent meals for us out of, what she could get her hands on, whether it was a hog or whether it was a rabbit or whether it was a duck. Or I used to watch her make chicken and dumpling soup, and nobody else has ever made chicken and dumpling the way she did, because it was real big fluffy balls that came out of there. I don't see that type of chicken and dumplings anymore. But my mother, that's what she was taught to make, and that's how she made them. I'm digressing, but
and that was Elias.
In other words, I'm saying, did Elijah Parker, get some land? Yes, as a result of some reward from the Civil War. Did my mother come east from South Dakota and spend time at Carlisle Indian School, and that somehow, some way, she went to the 8th grade there, and she ran into a man named Harry Nelson Gumby, and they got married? Yes, these things did happen. How or why or what? I never really pressed her for this. I did, and I guess I left that area too soon to get the information that maybe somebody like Harriet or somebody else that my mother might have told to. But my essence is that my mother's part Indian and part African American, and there may be some white mixed into it too. And Elijah Parker was what? Was he part Indian, or was he a mixture of African American and Caucasian, or something like that, which most people are. But where this extra comes into the picture is a little vague, and there's somebody who has more knowledge, one of the children who came before me, who might have been told more than what I was told. Because by the time it got to me, it might have been an old story, Carmen. That's what I'm trying to tell you, something like that. And
right.
so.
And so Elias is, I just need to get it straight from my head. Elias got the land, maybe the acreage, after the Civil War in Virginia before he came here, or was it here?
No, it right here.
Right here.
In Mount Holly Springs in Cumberland County is where the land was granted to him, because that's what the deeds say.
Okay.
Elijah. All our activities spin from what's called the Elijah Parker Estate. And so you ask yourself, what is that? That's 5.5 acres of land on 70 Mountain Street.
Okay, so 5.5 acres is what, God bless you. 5.5 acres is what the acreage. Okay.
That's what started the whole thing. From that, a log cabin was built. That house was built only in 2 stages. At first it was built as a 1-story log cabin, and then the second one was added on to it. Who did all of this? Elijah Parker and his associates. Maybe, Civil War buddies helped him out or something like that. Anyway, most people develop these handicaps. It's about a question of survival, really, what it boils down to. What do you do? Well, you need a place to stay, so you don't have the money, and you build it. You go get the trees, you chop them down, you splice them, you build a log cabin. And so the base of that house at 70 Mountain Street was a log cabin. It started out that way, and it kept increasing. And then somehow a woman came into the picture, and that that married Elijah Parker. So where did Harriet Ann Parker Gumby come into the picture? She could have told somebody, but obviously she came into the picture sometime, because she did tell me that she was brought by train from the Midwest, South.
Your mother was brought by train, or was it her mother?
No, she said she was brought by train.
Okay,
so she must have been born out there somewhere.
She was brought by train from the Midwest.
Hmm.
Okay.
And who is she? She is the daughter of eventually of Elijah Parker and some other woman. And it could have been that woman who was the mixed African Indian person, and that's why mother said what she was, but that she
Mm-hmm.
was a product of this relationship. Uh, and what they called them the Blackfoot because the type of moccasins that they wore were black, so they were, and so they called this the Blackfoot tribe. I think this tribe may still exist out there in some small proportion. But you understand what the confusing part for me is, how did Harry Ann Parker come to exist, something like that. That I was never told, other than the fact that she was brought in here for training. And she wasn't alone. A whole bunch of young women were brought in there, and the men too. You don't hear the story about the Carlisle Indian School and all the
Yes.
great athletes like Jim Thorpe and all that came out of there.
Yes.
Well, they
Yeah.
used to play schools. The Indian school used to play schools like Harvard and Yale and Princeton and beat them. They were
Wow.
they were like a college, so they were a high school playing college teams, in sports, because that's how good they were. Yeah, they had Jim Thornton. They played the colleges. So they did. They didn't play other high schools. It was the Indian school was just built for as a sort of high school. When you reached 18, 19, or 20, you were considered an adult, and you graduated from the school. But in order to produce an activity, an athletic activity, they made arrangements with various colleges around the country, and they played them. That's why Jim Thorpe became so great, because they were able to beat schools that were much more higher in standing and caliber than this little Carlisle Indian school, because they were a school which had the reputation that all African Americans and then have, that they couldn't do the things that white kids could do. And this even existed up to the time that I went to Penn State. I remember at Penn State in 1960, the big controversy was that other colleges like Alabama and Notre Dame and all were hiring and giving scholarships to African American students, but they didn't want them to play quarterback because the quarterback at Penn State's version, they weren't intelligent enough to play quarterback. He has to be able to learn all these plays, and maneuvers, and the black athletes. Remember, this time was 1960. I'm talking about, and
I know.
what I'm talking about.
I was a
What I'm
teenager.
talking about. Well, that they were not qualified to be, they could play other parts like the receivers catching passes and things like that, but they couldn't play the quarterback who runs the team. Well, that mentality was still in existence at Penn State. It wasn't there at other schools who were doing better than Penn State because they had black quarterbacks like Notre Dame and all that. They had learned, they were not following the same philosophy, but this was a philosophy at Penn State, and it's been a philosophy through 400 years that Africans were not as capable of doing just about anything that you want to name as the white man was, and this held sway for a long period of time. They even kept the white woman separate from them because they were going to produce mongrels and all sorts of disordered human beings and all. But this is part of the history of the country is what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
So how does this relate back to Harriet Ann Parker? Harriet Ann Parker is part Indian, part African American, and part probably Caucasian. And she and Harry Nelson Gumby got together and raised 11 kids. And they're now all over the map. They've been spread all over the place. So but it all started with a guy named Elijah Parker because he produced the mother side of it.
Yeah. And and as far as you know, he's the one that built the church?
With that's a gray area. I never had concrete information of how that church came into existence. I can read from, if you read Rosalind's biographies, you can see that there was many as something 123 different families living in this little area there of what you might call mountains, or they nicknamed Smoky Row and that sort of thing. But that's a lot of families, so it is for, and so that there. Why am I mentioning that? There must have been a certain amount of ingenuity. People like Elijah Parker, who could do something. These people, did you ever stop to think about the South as it grew, that all those mansions and things that they had, the beautiful mansions, how do you think that they got that way?
How did they got built?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Somebody had to build them.
Yeah, somebody had to build them. And who was that person that did it on their strong backs? The slaves.
Yeah, you're right.
That's a well-documented fact. There was nobody else, so and they kept bringing more of them over. And not only that, the master was going into the slave village and producing children himself. So there's very few African Americans who can call themselves African American. Really, to be honest with you, they're
That's
already
true.
they've been already mingled up. So they have.
Yeah.
Well, and,
is there anything else that you think that I may have forgotten to ask that you would want to make part of this interview?
I'm puzzled only by one thing, why it dwindled down to the point, where there was only a few families left in that area. It seemed to be a thriving area at one time, and why it, as each generation came about, they separated and went, towards the big cities or someplace like that where they could find work or something like that. About the only thing you could do in Mount Holly Springs was be a farmer of some type and raise vegetables and resell them or something like that. But if you could get a college education or something like that, then the opportunity to improve yourself would improve greatly, something like that. But what caused it to dwindle down to the state where there's less than a half a dozen families left there? I don't know, but it wasn't that way at one time.
Well,
Anyway,
William, we sort of reached the end of the interview time. And I want to thank you again for sharing. I'll tell you, you've given information that's of value, and as I said, you'll get the sign-off form in the mail, and if you'll send it back, we would appreciate that. And I want to thank you for your time. I know I've probably ran down both phones, but I want to thank you very much.
You too. And have a nice day now.
All right. Take care, William. And I'll try and get you some pictures.
We'll see. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.